Chapter 33, Closing the Capital Gates, Survival of Yong'an Barred. And I do have a content warning for this chapter. There's graphic depictions of violence, so if at any point you need to stop and take a break, compose yourself, go ahead and do that. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here when you get back. Take care of yourself. Your Highness, what took you so long? Muqing asked. Shi Lian was taken aback. Was I really gone that long? Traveling all over the heavens and earth, scooping up lake water, mounting clouds and making rain, all without care for day or night. Shi Lian hadn't realized just how much time has passed. It's been days, Muqing exclaimed. There's a mountain of backed-up prayers from devotees at the temple of the Crown Prince. Just then, Shi Lian felt the rain fading and extended a hand. Did I not leave instructions for the two of you to handle the important ones first? Of course we handled what we could, Muqing replied. But there are too many prayers that we don't have the authority to manage. That's why I asked your Highness not to make them wait too long and to hurry back. As he finished speaking, the rain stopped. The rainstorm was much shorter than Shi Lian had expected, and he felt his heart sinking. As the clouds dispersed, the green bamboo hat came fluttering down, and Shi Lian caught it with both hands. But do you see the situation? I can't pull myself away from here either. Muqing frowned. Your Highness, did you manage to borrow the Rainmaster's spiritual device? Where did the water come from? From the kingdom of Yushi in the south, Shi Lian replied. That far? Muqing exclaimed. How much power did it take you to move water just once? And if you're determined to keep watering Yong'an with these sparse storms, how will you keep up with your followers' prayers? Even if he hadn't said it out loud, Shi Lian understood. He was a martial god, and the devotees to the temple of the Crown Prince were his foundation, the source of his spiritual power. His actions now were essentially abandoning that foundation, and if he wasn't careful, both sides would suffer. But what else could he do? I know, Shi Lian said, but if things go on like this and a riot breaks out in Yong'an, the temple of the Crown Prince will be affected sooner or later. That's already happened, Muqing exclaimed. Shi Lian was shocked. What? At that, Shi Lian rushed back to the imperial capital of Shinla. When he arrived at the Grand Avenue of Divine Might, a band of imperial soldiers clad in armor and wielding sharp weapons were marching a line of detained men down the road. The prisoners were unkempt, with their hands and heads locked in kongus. Citizens crowded both sides of the road, fury evident on every one of their faces. Fengshen tensely gripped his black bow as if preparing for a riot at any moment. Fengshen! Shi Lian demanded sharply. Who are those detainees? What crime did they commit? Where are they taking them? Hearing his voice, Fengshen hurried over. Your Highness, they're all people of Yong'an. There were dozens of men in that line, all tall and gaunt, their skin tanned and dark from the sun. Behind the soldiers trailed several old men and a number of stricken women and children. The ones following behind are as well? Shi Lian questioned. All of them, Muqing confirmed. Over the past several months, at the height of the drought, Yong'an residents uprooted their lives and fled to the east in droves. When it was only a few dozen people, it wasn't obvious, but the flow kept coming, and by now, there were more than 500 of them. When a massive, dense crowd like that gathered, it became quite the spectacle. The people of Yong'an were strangers to this land, with nothing to their names, and the moment they opened their mouths, their dialects gave them away. So when they arrived at this strange, bustling city, they naturally stuck together for comfort. After searching all over, they finally found an uninhabited green meadow within the imperial capital. Overjoyed, they built sheds and huts as temporary shelters. Unfortunately, although the field was uninhabited, it was very dear to those of the imperial capital. The culture of Shinla was quite indulgent, and residents of the imperial capital were leaders in that lifestyle. Citizens would gather at that field to stroll, dance, sing poetry, paint, practice the art of the sword, and so on. Yong'an, on the other hand, had always been poor, so the temperament and culture of the citizens of this western land were completely opposite to those of the east. Because of this, the citizens of the imperial capital often believed that they had the purest Shinla blood. And now, their elegant city had been overtaken by a large number of refugees who filled the air with their strange smells and sounds. The constant disruption of laundry and campfires, the stench of stewing herbs and leftovers and sweat, the unending weeping, and made many nearby residents recoil with disgust, and their complaints were endless. Some of the elder Yong'an leaders understood their predicament and wanted to move elsewhere. Yet the imperial capital was already heavily populated. No matter where they went, it was crowded with people, and there wasn't anywhere else that they could settle so many. Furthermore, they had wounded people, sick people, old folks, and children, which made it infeasible to move frequently. They had no choice but to shamelessly, yet cautiously, cling to that meadow. As much as it displeased the people of the imperial capital, the refugees were still citizens of the same country. In light of the ongoing disaster, they tolerated the stranger's presence. Xu Lian had heard up to that point in the situation report when the band of soldiers arrived at the mouth of the marketplace with the Yong'an men in tow. The soldiers bellowed, "Kneel!" Every one of the men looked indignant, but with blades at their throats, they had no choice but to kneel. When the crowd of capital citizens saw the men drop to their knees, some sighed, but others clearly felt vindicated. "According to your report, both sides have tolerated each other thus far. So what happened today?" Xu Lian asked. Before Feng Xin or Mu Qin could answer, a woman started wailing and crying from the crowd. "You barbaric thieves! Never mind your sticky fingers! You beat my husband so badly that he can't get up! If he doesn't recover, I'll make you pay!" Next to her, a number of people rushed to comfort her, and some pointed their fingers in reproach. "Don't you know how to behave when you're living in other people's territory? Yeah, you're guests in our home, but you've made yourselves real comfortable, haven't you? Thieves!" One of the bound men finally couldn't take it anymore. "We already told you we didn't steal anything," he argued. "We didn't throw the first punch either. Besides, we've got wounded people on our side, too." "Stop talking," a Yong'an elder admonished him. The man shut his mouth angrily. "A dog went missing in the imperial capital," Feng Xin explained. "There was an incident earlier where a Yong'an child stole and ate someone's duck out of extreme hunger. So there were rumors that the dog was stolen and eaten by the Yong'an refugees, too. A mob went to interrogate, and then started a brawl when the interrogation went south." Xu Lian was incredulous. "A riot over a dog? And they detained this many people?" "Yes, over a dog," Feng Xin said. "It blew up this badly because both sides have been putting up with each other for too long. Even petty things can become a big deal. Both sides swear that the other side started it, that it's the other's fault, and this nonsensical scuffle just got bigger and bigger. 'Violent rioters shall see severe punishment,' a high-ranking soldier announced. 'You are all sentenced to the Kanggu for public condemnation. Any further crimes are forbidden.'" After the sentencing, he stood down, and the next second some of the crowd started hurling lettuce leaves and rotten eggs at the men of Yong'an. The old men who trailed behind started bowing to the crowd, crying for mercy. "We apologize, everyone! We apologize! Please, have mercy! Have mercy!" Xu Lian thought this whole thing was absolutely absurd, making a mountain out of a molehill. But he could also understand the feelings on both sides. So did they really steal anything? Did they find that dog? Feng Xin shook his head. Who knows? If the bones were stripped and thrown away, who could prove anything? But judging by their faces, I don't think they did it. But of course, the soldiers of the imperial capital would favor the capital's citizens when handing down their judgment. Whether anything had been stolen or not, there had been a riot, and so the fault must lie with those from Yong'an. Furthermore, while the men of the imperial capital loved to strut around, they weren't as tough as the men of Yong'an. They must have been utterly humiliated in that brawl, and that complete loss of face only created greater fuel between the two groups. Xu Lian shook his head. As his gaze swept over the crowd, he suddenly noticed a familiar-looking young man in the middle of that row of Yong'an prisoners, with his head hung low. It was that man from the woods, Lang Ying. Xu Lian was stunned. Just then, someone nearby complained, "It seems like more and more of these Yong'an people have been showing up in the past few months, and now they've started to pick fights. They're not all coming here, are they?" A man who appeared to be a merchant gestured wildly. "His Majesty the King won't allow it. My house was robbed by Yong'an thieves just the other day. If they all come here, there'll be hell." Lang Ying had kept his head low all this time, letting the groceries hit him freely. But at those words, he suddenly looked up. "Did you see it?" The merchant hadn't expected a response, and replied without thinking. "What?" "Yong'an thieves robbing your house. Did you see them with your own eyes?" I didn't see them myself, but it's always been peaceful here before. I was only robbed after you all showed up. So how can you say it has nothing to do with you?" the merchant argued. Lang Ying nodded. "I get it. Before we came here, your people were the ones stealing, but once we arrived, we became the thieves." A rotten persimmon came flying at him before he could finish, and smashed into the side of his mouth, looking like he'd vomited a splatter of blood. The merchant burst out laughing, and Lang Ying's eyes dimmed. He closed his mouth and stopped talking. Shi Lian dissolved the sharp rocks that were thrown at the young men, ensuring that they wouldn't be severely injured. This public humiliation continued until evening, and only after the onlooking citizens finally dispersed did the soldiers decide it was enough. Only then did they unlock the kongus and warn the men not to cause any more trouble, otherwise they'd be severely punished, and so on and so on. The elders bowed deeply over and over with apologetic smiles, promising to never violate the rules ever again. But Lang Ying looked apathetic, walked away all alone. Shi Lian watched that lone figure depart, then caught the right moment to appear in a flash from behind a tree and block his path. The moment he appeared, the young man's eyes sharpened, and in that instant, it looked like he was going to choke Shi Lian dead. He took a second to process who was standing before him, and withdrew the hand that was ready to attack. "It's you." Shi Lian had transformed back into the form of that young cultivator. Lang Ying had almost managed to seize him, which startled Shi Lian even as he thought, "This man is a little impressive." "I gave you that pearl," he said. "So why didn't you take it back to Yong'an?" Lang Ying regarded him. "My son is here. I'm here too." After a brief pause, he took the pearl from his belt. "Do you want it back?" "Here." The hand he held out still had marks from the kongu. After a moment of silence, Shi Lian didn't take it. "Go back. It rained at the Bay of Longair today." He pointed to the sky. "Tomorrow, there will be rain again. I promise. It's certain to be so." But Lang Ying shook his head. "It doesn't matter if it rains or not. There's no going back." Watching his back as he walked away, Shi Lian was left dumbfounded. He only felt endless frustration. Before he ascended, it was like he hadn't a cloud of worry in his skies. He could do whatever he wanted. Who could have known that after ascension, he would suddenly be surrounded by incessant worries, both the worries of others and his own? Had it always been this hard to get something done? He had never felt so lacking, so powerless. Shi Lian sighed and turned to leave as well. There was a mountain of prayers waiting to be addressed by him at the temple of the Crown Prince. Yet he wasn't the most troubled of all. That title went to the king, for the worries of the king of Shinla had become reality. Those 500-some Yong'an refugees were only the beginning. With the borrowed Rainmaster's hat in hand, Shi Lian ran unceasingly back and forth between the north and the south, creating rain by his own power. Yet every little rainstorm used up an immense amount of spiritual power in 5 to 6 days' worth of his time. There may not have been another god besides him who could keep up such a draining duty, besides Junwu, of course. However, the Heavenly Emperor ruled over a far vaster land than he, and the number of devotees and domains he attended to was significantly greater than Shinla. How could Shi Lian possibly distract Junwu by asking for help? And still, each rainstorm could only wet a small area of Yong'an, and lasted but a short while. Even if they caused some relief, they couldn't fix the root of the problem. After a month of this, the people of Yong'an began their exodus to the east in droves. Before, it was groups of dozens at a time. Now it was hundreds, thousands, massive hordes that flocked together, streaming like a river.